Hi, it's Dennis Daly. South Dakota was one of the last states I visited when going to all 50. I visited Vermillion, which is in the far southeastern part of the state, and when I was there, I was told about an emergency archeological dig to try to look into the history of the U.S. They think they have found artifacts of a spot 11,000 years ago used by Native Americans to hunt down and kill animals by driving them off a cliff. My tour guide, Larry Bradley, said they had to act quickly because they were going to tear the hillside out to build a highway.
What we have here is part of a grid system that we use to document exactly where objects are found. We were very interested in the coordinates of these artifacts, where they occur in three-dimensional space. So we have the lines running across the site so that they're baselines that we can measure from. We set up an instrument and we measure depths so we know exactly horizontally and vertically where every object in the site appears.
I know it's very much in fashion when you think of archaeology to think of Egypt, and people since they were children have known about King Tut and the pyramids and the Sphinx and all that kind of thing. Do most people forget how much archaeology has gone on the North American continent and how much of our heritage is really being checked out?
I think that people, in terms of the prehistory, I think that people probably aren't aware of the rich cultural heritage that exists in North America. We've got sites in this area dating back to about 11,000 years. The site you're standing on is probably, we have one Clovis point from this site. And,
okay, let's define that. That's an arrow point?
It's a projectile point, and it was used as part of a composite projectile that was probably propelled by using a spear thrower, and it was used on in some instances it's associated with mammoths and other extinct fauna. So this point is associated with a very early cultural complex here in the New World.
Is 11,000 years ago considered to be really old as far as a dig in North America? How old would the oldest be that archaeologists have found?
There are debates going on as to how far back we can push the earliest Americans, the people who arrived here from Asia. And some people claim that it might go back 20,000 years, 19,000 years, or some people are claiming as the time depth greater than 30,000 years. But the best documented material we've got is from this time period of about 11 to 12,000 years ago. It's undeniable in terms of if you ask most archaeologists, they wouldn't dispute this, but the material that's found that in association, in contexts that might be interpreted as earlier, there's a lot of debate.
Now we're standing on a bluff, and in one direction we can see single-family dwellings, a couple of businesses, some double-wide house trailers. There's a motel over there, a discount store. This way there's both the old highway which went into town down Main Street, which is now closed, and the bypass and farmland and a grain bin and storage area. Do we know what this would have looked like 10,000 years ago here? Was it just, has there been upheaval? Has this changed dramatically?
The area hasn't changed a lot. We've had about, probably 3 feet or a meter of deposition here on the hilltop.
You mean additional dirt? Additional dirt.
The only way it could be derived is it's being blown into the area. There's no water. We're on the highest point of land in this particular part of the field we're standing in, so there's no way we can derive this other than by wind transport. Below us, if you look out into the valley and you can see the Vermillion River winds around below, closer to the bluff. Then there's a wide floodplain to the Missouri River. The Missouri River's probably changed. The channel has shifted back and forth a little bit. The Vermillion, we know from deposits on the other side, was probably pretty much in this position at least 4,000 years ago.
Now, do archaeologists think it better, or is it advantageous for you to be in a strata of dirt, soil, underment, if I can make up a word, that has been relatively undisturbed, or do you do better where there's been an uplift that things get exposed, or does it work both ways?
Well, usually the only way we find sites is through some kind of exposure, either erosion or either deep testing or some technique like that. But generally, if the stratigraphy isn't disturbed, we're a lot better off. If the material is what we call in situ, then we can look at the material and we know that the context, the association between all these artifacts is the way it was in the past, and it assists our interpretation of these the function of these items and their associations.
Well, now, how was this site discovered? I mean, there are no AAA maps from 10,000 years ago saying this was a lookout point or a burial site or whatever dig you do. How do you find those? Are there? I presume discoveries happen a lot of different ways.
This particular site was found by an archaeologist who was working for the Historical Preservation Office, and he was out one weekend and it looked like a likely place. So he went out into the field, walked around, noted stuff on the surface. We came back and checked it out. We collected some material. We kind of plotted the range of where the material was on the surface, and we've had, for about the last 5 years, we've had the archaeology days at the local middle school here on the site, and we've had excavations going on over a long period of time then since the site's discovery. Only recently have we found some of the very early material in the site, and it's a very large site. This site is probably a half-mile long.
What kinds of things are you finding up here? I know on the way up the hill, and it's kind of a steep walk up, you said that this was likely an observation point for hunting, and certainly you can see down into the valley a huge area. You can look, we're probably looking 10, 12 miles over into that area to the west of us toward Yankton.
It's probably it could very easily be a game lookout point. We do find in the site itself, we found the evidence of stone tool manufacture. We've got areas where people were making and maintaining stone tools. We do have some bone. The bone is not, we don't have huge quantities of bone from this particular location. We do have some bones of extinct fauna here, but we don't have a lot of elements of, say, animals like bison, probably because they're just bringing in some parts of the animals. Now, below the bluff, we've got another site that was exposed in the bank of the Vermilion River, and that site has nearly complete bison remains. They're broken up, they're disarticulated, but we've got most of the animals represented, so we assume some of those animals are killed closer to their range down below the bluff here, and that some parts are brought back up and processed maybe up here on top of the hill.
But in a way, at the bottom of the hill on the bank of the river would have been what we would call a butcher shop today, maybe.
That's essentially what it is. It's probably butchering and some of the preliminary disarticulation of the animals. There's some broken bones, so the marrow was probably extracted. We have a few hearths, burned areas there where the meat could have been dried. Some of it could have been prepared at that location. It might have been there may have been some other activities going on, but primarily what we find down there, it's a narrowing in the space between the bluff edge and the Vermilion River. And since we know the Vermilion River has been stable over a fairly long period of time, we assume that this narrowing, when these bison were caught in the narrowing, that they were dispatched at that location, and then most of the elements then appear. They're butchered on the spot, processed to some extent, and the people move on.
Yes, life in the United States might go back more than 11,000 years. I'm Dennis Daly.